"Get out of here! You don't belong in this restaurant!" The shout cracked through the restaurant like glass shattering. Forks froze midair. Conversations died. Every head turned toward the doorway, where a black woman stood, stunned, her hand still on the door handle. It was the owner. His face twisted in anger, his voice echoing, "I said you don't belong here! Did you hear me?" The woman blinked, her chest tightening. She'd eaten here before. She'd spent her money here just like anyone else. But now, at this moment, she wasn't a customer. She was a target. Murmurs rolled through the room, but no one spoke up. Her pulse raced as heat burned across her face. This wasn't just rejection. It was racism, loud and unapologetic. And still, the silence of the crowd cut deeper than his words. She swallowed hard, whispering only to herself, This can't be happening." But the eyes staring back told her otherwise, and the worst was still to come. Her body wouldn't move. Her legs felt nailed to the floor. She stood there, every breath sharp, every second stretching into eternity. A chair scraped against the tile. Someone pulled out their phone, camera aimed straight at her humiliation. Another leaned closer to a friend and whispered, loud enough for her to hear. She should have known better. Her heart pounded as she glanced around, searching for one sympathetic face. One person willing to say, "Stop, this is wrong." Instead, she saw people looking away, pretending to read menus, pretending it wasn't their business. The owner folded his arms, his smirk growing. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" Her mouth opened, but no words came. Only the ache in her throat. The sting of shame. The weight of being alone in a room full of people. She wished the ground would swallow her whole. But instead, the cruelty pressed closer. Finally, her voice broke through, trembling. Why? Why are you doing this? What did I ever do to you?" The owner leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with cruel satisfaction. "You know why?" The 3 words hit harder than a slap. No explanation. No justification. Just the raw, naked truth of his prejudice. Gasps rippled through a few tables. Someone muttered, "That's not right." But it died in their throat as the owner turned his glare toward them. The woman's fists clenched at her sides, nails digging into her palms. She wanted to scream, to fight, to remind him she was human. But the smirk on his face told her, that's exactly what he wanted. Her chest rose and fell, each breath heavier than the last. Because deep down she realized this wasn't just about her meal, it was about power. And right now, he had it all. Whispers floated across the room like poison. She should just leave. Don't make it worse. A young man at the back lifted his phone higher, recording every second. But recording wasn't the same as helping. The woman scanned the room again, her eyes pleading. Surely someone would stand up. Surely someone would defend her dignity. But most averted their gaze. Some pretended to chew. A few exchanged uneasy glances, but still, no one moved. The owner grinned wider, feeding off their silence. "See? Nobody wants you here. Why don't you take the hint?" Her chest ached. Betrayal cut deeper than his insult. Because the truth was clear. It wasn't just his voice condemning her. It was their silence, their choice to do nothing, and it broke her more than his words ever could. Tears blurred her vision, but she refused to let them fall. She straightened her back, her voice low but steady enough to pierce the quiet. "You'll regret this." The owner's grin faltered, just for a flicker. The diners froze, sensing something shift in the air. Her words weren't loud. They weren't shouted at, but they carried weight. A promise. She turned toward the door, each step heavy, her heart pounding with rage and humiliation. The restaurant stayed frozen in silence, all eyes following her as she walked away. The last thing they heard before the door closed behind her was that whispered warning echoing like a storm on the horizon, and none of them could shake the feeling that this story was far from over. If you were in her shoes, would you have stayed quiet or spoken up? And if you were in that restaurant, would you have done nothing or stepped in? Danielle, don't let them see you break. Her own voice whispered inside her head as the memory of the restaurant burned fresh in her chest. Danielle Carter, 36 years old, accountant by trade, survivor by necessity. To most, she was just another face in the crowd, the woman crunching numbers in a cubicle no one noticed. But inside, she carried a fire they'd tried to extinguish her whole life. Bills stacked high, long hours drained her spirit, yet every morning she walked out that door, chin up, like the world hadn't just spat in her face the night before. She wasn't just surviving. She was fighting for dignity, for a name that wouldn't be swallowed by silence. They called her just a woman, but her story was far from ordinary, and she was nowhere near done. Danielle's hands smelled of yeast more than ink. After office hours, she traded spreadsheets for recipes, kneading dough as though she could press her pain into something sweeter. "One day, Maya," she would tell her daughter, "we'll have a bakery. People will walk in and feel love in every loaf." That dream wasn't just about bread. It was about a place where no one could tell her she didn't belong. A corner of the world stitched with warmth instead of prejudice. It was fragile, yes, but so was hope. And Danielle guarded it like treasure. Every morning began with Maya's laugh echoing through their small apartment, the kind of sound that turned Danielle's exhaustion into resolve. "Mom, when you have your bakery, can I be the taste tester?" The girl would giggle, curls bouncing. Danielle would smile, even when her body begged for rest. "You'll be my partner," she'd reply. For her daughter, quitting wasn't an option. Racism could bruise her spirit, debt could chain her feet, but nothing would strip away the promise she'd made. Maya would grow up seeing her mother stand tall, no matter the weight pressing down. The streets Danielle walked were layered with history, her history. She'd played double dutch on cracked sidewalks, watched friends disappear to violence, felt opportunity slip through doors that were never meant to open for her. Every brick carried a memory, joy, struggle, and the quiet sting of being reminded where she stood. She knew the taste of both laughter and loss, of belonging and rejection. This was her community, and yet it was also her battlefield. It made her tough, but it also left scars no one could see. Danielle's life, though fragile, had rhythm. Work Maya, late nights of baking, stolen moments of hope. It seemed almost steady until the night in that restaurant shattered the illusion. She didn't know it yet, but the humiliation she suffered was only the beginning. A storm had been gathering, silent and merciless, and soon it would test everything she thought she had built. "Right this way, girl." The word hit harder than the smile that carried it. Danielle blinked, unsure if she'd misheard, but no. The owner's lips curled in that polished grin, the kind that hid more than it revealed. Not ma'am, not miss, just girl, dripping with the kind of condescension that reduced her to less than. Her throat tightened, but she forced a polite nod. "Thank you," she murmured, though her chest pulsed with unease. "Busy tonight," the man added, gesturing grandly toward the dining room. "Hope you'll be comfortable." His pause lingered just long enough for the sentence to sting. Danielle followed, her heels clicking against the tile, each step heavy with a question she didn't dare voice. Was she imagining it? Or was the room just a little too still, a little too watchful? But she told herself to breathe, to focus. She'd worked too hard to let a single word unravel her. Still, the seed was planted, and she could already feel its roots spreading. The owner leaned closer as she scanned the menu. His voice dipped low, mocking in its softness. "Are you sure you can afford this place?" Danielle froze, the words slicing clean through the chatter around them. Her head jerked up, eyes locking onto his smirk. "Excuse me?" He shrugged, feigning innocence. "It's not cheap here. Don't want you caught off guard when the check comes." A couple at the next table shifted in their seats, their glances sharp but fleeting, like sparks snuffed before they could catch flame. Danielle's lips pressed tight. "I didn't ask for your concern," she said, steady but clipped. His grin widened. "Just looking out, girl." That word again. Girl. It crawled under her skin, sharp as glass. She inhaled slowly, telling herself not to rise, not yet. But something told her this was only the beginning. When Danielle requested a seat by the window, he chuckled lightly, shaking his head. "Oh, those are already spoken for." His hand motioned instead toward the back, where the faint stench of disinfectant leaked from the restroom doors. Her stomach sank. A table crammed between noise and odor, when half the front still sat empty. "Here's perfect for you," he said, sliding the menu onto the scratched surface like it was a gift. Danielle sat slowly, her back stiff. The humiliation was quiet, but deliberate, and it burned more than shouting ever could. She watched as a young couple walked in moments later, greeted with warm laughter, guided to the very seat she'd requested. Her hands curled into fists under the table. This wasn't a coincidence. This was placement, like she was being told without words, exactly where she belonged. Conversations faltered. A woman at a nearby booth whispered, her eyes darting toward Danielle before returning to her drink. A man across the room glanced over, then back at his plate, chewing slower now, uneasy. They all noticed, but no one said a word. Danielle caught the flicker of pity in one woman's face, the guilt in another's. Yet pity didn't speak, and guilt didn't act. Their silence was deafening, a wall of indifference pressing down on her. Her pulse hammered in her ears. Every bite of laughter, every clink of silverware felt staged, like the whole room was pretending not to witness what was happening. Danielle swallowed hard. The weight of their silence was heavier than the insults themselves. The words weren't meant for her ears, but they carried on. Clear, sharp, cruel. Don't let her kind sit up front. Her chest tightened as the owner's voice drifted from the corner where he spoke to a waiter. Her kind. Danielle's nails dug into her palm, leaving crescents of rage in her skin. Suddenly, every fake smile, every word laced with poison made sense. This wasn't a chance. It wasn't an oversight. It was intentional. Her eyes burned. But she refused to let the tears fall here, not in front of him, not in front of them. Still, the whisper echoed in her skull over and over until it felt less like a comment and more like a sentence. And Danielle knew deep down the humiliation was far from over. "Didn't you hear me?" The owner's voice cracked like a whip across the room, slicing through every conversation. Danielle flinched, menu still in her hands. I'd like to order—" "You don't get it," he barked, his face twisted in disdain. "We don't serve your kind here." The words dropped like a stone, silencing the entire restaurant. Forks froze midair. Glasses hovered at lips. A child somewhere whimpered, but no one moved. Danielle's chest tightened as heat rushed up her neck. She tried to steady her voice. "Excuse me? What did you just say?" He leaned closer, his words deliberate, venom curling in every syllable. "I said, we don't serve you." The room held its breath, shock, disbelief, and then something worse, acceptance. Danielle's hands trembled against the table edge. She wanted to scream, to fight, to demand justice, but her voice caught in her throat, drowned out by the echo of those words. All eyes were on her, not him. She could feel it, the judgment, the pity, the weight of centuries condensed into one moment. And as the silence dragged on, Danielle realized this was no misunderstanding. This was humiliation, sharpened into a public spectacle, and he wanted everyone to watch. "Mommy?" A small voice tugged at the quiet. Maya's voice. Danielle's heartbeat. The little girl looked up with wide eyes, confusion painted across her face. "Why is he yelling at us?" Danielle's throat ached as she knelt to her daughter's level, desperate to shield her from the cruelty dripping off the walls. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, though her voice quivered. "It's just a mistake." But the lie tasted bitter. The owner snorted. "A mistake? No, ma'am. This is policy." His emphasis on the word ma'am was mockery, a dagger twisted in false politeness. Maya blinked, her tiny hand clutching her mother's. "But why? We didn't do anything wrong." The innocence in her words shattered Danielle's defenses. Every stare in the room pressed down harder, heavier. And suddenly, it wasn't just about her dignity. It was about the lesson being branded into her daughter's memory. Danielle's voice broke as she pulled Maya close. "You did nothing wrong, sweetheart, nothing." But as she said it, tears burned her eyes. Because she knew her daughter would remember this moment forever. A waitress approached quietly, her eyes soft with sorrow. She leaned down, voice trembling. "I'm so sorry. I don't agree with this." Her words were a whisper, almost drowned by the growing murmur of the crowd. At the next table, an older woman muttered, "It's shameful, treating people like that." But just as the flicker of compassion rose, laughter slashed through it. A young man at the bar snickered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Guess she should have picked another place." Rules are rules. A few chuckled nervously, others stared harder at their plates. The divide was clear, sympathy on one side, cruelty on the other. But both left Danielle exposed. The waitress's hand lingered briefly on Danielle's shoulder before retreating, fear etched into her face. She wanted to help, but not enough to risk her job. Danielle sat frozen, the laughter echoing louder than the whispers, the pity stinging almost as much as the insults. Because pity was still powerless, and powerless was no shield. "Hey!" a voice finally rang out. A middle-aged man in a business suit stood, his tone sharp. "This is wrong. Let the woman order her food." For a split second, hope surged in Danielle's chest. But then another voice, mocking, bitter. "Sit down, man. You're making it worse. If the owner doesn't want her here, that's his right." Murmurs rippled like a storm through the restaurant. "She deserves respect. Respect! She doesn't belong here." Arguments ignited from table to table. Strangers pitted against each other while Danielle stood in the center, silent, trembling. She wasn't a customer anymore. She wasn't even a person. She was a battleground, a symbol, her humanity stripped away by voices fighting over her like she wasn't even present. Maya pressed her face into Danielle's side, whispering, "Mommy, can we go home?" Danielle swallowed hard, her body shaking as the chaos swirled around her. The battle lines weren't for her, they were about her. And that betrayal cut deeper than any insult. The noise faded into a dull roar in Danielle's ears. Her hands moved on instinct, gathering her purse, her daughter's backpack, the loose items she could grab without showing the quake in her fingers. Her legs felt like stone as she rose. The restaurant parted, the silence returning in waves as she walked toward the exit. Every step was heavy, weighted with shame not her own, but carried all the same. She refused to look up, refused to meet the stares, the pity, the gloating smiles. Her daughter clung tightly to her, whispering, "It's okay, Mommy. We don't need them." Danielle bit her lip until she tasted blood, her eyes burning. The silence of the crowd followed her, sealing the moment like a coffin. Not one hand reached out. Not one voice said, "Enough." By the time she reached the door, her dignity felt stripped bare, scattered across the tile floor like shattered glass. And the owner watched, satisfied as though he had won. The night air hit her like a slap, cold and merciless. Danielle stumbled outside, tears spilling unchecked down her face. She held Maya close, the little girl's warmth the only anchor in a world that had just caved in. For a moment, Danielle wanted to collapse, to disappear into the darkness and never return. But then Maya's small voice whispered, "Mommy, don't let them win." Danielle's breath hitched. She closed her eyes, inhaling slowly, steady. When she spoke, her voice was ragged but firm, a vow carved into the night. "This isn't the end," she whispered. "Tomorrow things will change." The words weren't just for Maya, they were for herself. A promise forged in humiliation, hardened into steel. And though her body shook, her spirit lit with something fierce. Because the sweetest revenge would not be silence. It would be justice. Have you ever witnessed someone being humiliated in public like this? "What did you do?" "Why me? Why always me?" Danielle whispered into the darkness, her voice breaking as tears soaked the pillow. Every insult replayed in her mind, the sneer, the laughter, the silence of strangers who chose comfort over courage. Her chest felt heavy, crushed under the weight of humiliation. But beneath the ache, something else stirred. Anger. A fire long buried under years of swallowing pride began to burn. She sat up, clutching her blanket. "No more!" she breathed, trembling but firm. The night stretched on with sobs muffled into the fabric, but her heart no longer carried only pain. Every tear hardened her resolve. They wanted her small. They wanted her silent. But injustice had lit a spark that wouldn't be smothered. By dawn, exhaustion pressed her eyes shut. Yet inside, one truth echoed louder than shame. This isn't the end. And deep down, Danielle knew her fight had only just begun. A knock at the door jolted her from restless sleep. The postman handed her a thick envelope, its weight unusual. Inside, Danielle found a letter written in her late uncle's careful hand. Her breath caught. He had left her something. A trust, built quietly over decades, meant for her and her daughter's future. She reread the words, her hands shaking. It wasn't millions, but it was enough. More than she had ever imagined owning. "Maya," she whispered, clutching the paper, "your future just changed." Grief for her uncle mixed with a surge of gratitude. He had believed in her when so many others didn't. And now, through his legacy, doors she thought locked forever suddenly cracked open. Danielle folded the letter against her chest, the faintest smile breaking through the storm inside her. Opportunity had knocked when she least expected it, and she was ready to answer. The words stopped her cold. For sale. Inquire within. Danielle stood frozen on the sidewalk, staring at the sign posted on the building's brick wall. The same building that housed the restaurant where she was humiliated just one night ago. Her pulse quickened. She walked closer, disbelief battling with awe. Could this be real? The universe had placed the very ground of her humiliation within her reach. For a moment, fear whispered, "It's too big, too risky." But another voice, louder now, fiercer, pushed back. "This is it. This is your chance to rise, her uncle's gift, her sleepless resolve, and now this sign." It all felt like fate aligning. Danielle clenched her fists. What had been a place of shame could become her greatest triumph. And in that instant, resolve hardened. She would not let this slip away. Danielle's pen hovered over the contract. The lawyer across from her nodded, calm but knowing. "Once you sign, it's yours. Entirely yours." Her hands shook, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of the moment. She thought of Maya's innocent question in that restaurant. She thought of the owner's smug face, dripping with cruelty. And then she pressed the pen to paper. The signature was simple, quiet. But in Danielle's heart it roared. She had just shifted the balance of power without him knowing. The lawyer slid the papers into a folder, smiling. "Congratulations, Ms. Carter. You own the building," Danielle exhaled, tears stinging her eyes. Not of sorrow this time, but victory. The silence of injustice had been broken, not with words, but with action. And though no one else knew it yet, her future had never been louder. The next morning, Danielle walked past the restaurant, chin high. The owner stood at the doorway, coffee in hand, his eyes narrowing the moment he spotted her. He sneered, that same arrogant smirk that had cut her down the day before. But this time she didn't flinch. She met his glare head-on, lips curving into a quiet, knowing smile. A smirk that carried secrets he couldn't yet imagine. He scoffed, dismissing her as if she were nothing. But Danielle kept walking, her steps steady, her heart surging with the sweetest revenge, control. Because while he saw only a woman he thought beneath him, Danielle knew the truth. The ground under his feet, the walls around him, the doors he thought he owned, they all belonged to her now, and soon. He would find out in the most devastating way. "What is this supposed to mean?" The owner barked, tearing open the envelope left on his desk. His eyes scanned the official notice, and for the first time in years, his voice faltered, effective immediately. "The property has changed ownership." His hands trembled, the paper rattling as sweat gathered on his brow. He read the line again and again, as if repetition might change the truth staring back at him. His face was drained of color. This wasn't just a shift in paperwork. This was his livelihood dangling over the edge. No, this can't be right," he muttered, shoving the paper down but unable to ignore the seal, the signatures, the undeniable finality. And in that moment, fear replaced arrogance. The restaurant door flew open, slamming against the wall as he stormed out. Rage burned in his eyes. But the fury froze mid-step. Danielle stood on the sidewalk, tall and unyielding, her lawyer beside her with a folder in hand. "You!" he hissed, pointing at her as though she'd stolen the ground beneath his feet. "Yes," Danielle replied calmly, her voice steady, carrying power he couldn't crush this time. He searched for words, but only sputters came out. The man who once mocked her now looked small, trapped between pride and panic. For the first time, it wasn't Danielle shrinking under his gaze. It was him. Danielle's voice cut the air like glass. "Yesterday you told me I didn't belong here, that I wasn't good enough to sit at your table." The owner's jaw tightened, but his silence betrayed the truth. "Well," she continued, eyes locked on his, "today I'm not asking for a seat. I own the building you're standing in, which means from this moment on it's you who answers to me." Her lawyer handed him the official documents. His hands shook so violently he nearly dropped them. For once, Danielle's words weren't swallowed by laughter or pity. They landed with the weight of justice, and everyone around could hear them. The restaurant staff, who had been peeking nervously from inside, erupted into cheers. A few customers clapped, relief and satisfaction washing over their faces. The same room that once echoed with cruelty now thundered with support. "She deserves this," someone shouted. Another diner added, "About time someone stood up to him." The owner's glare darted from face to face, but no one defended him now. The divide had vanished, unity surged, and Danielle was at the center of it. Danielle raised her hand, quieting the noise. Her voice carried clear, unwavering. "From now on, this place will welcome everyone. No discrimination, no humiliation. Only respect." The crowd applauded, louder this time, while the owner stood speechless, his defeat carved into the silence that followed. Danielle's gaze never left him as she finished, "Because dignity isn't optional. It's the new rule here." And though the chapter closed in triumph, one truth lingered in the air. This was only the beginning of her reign. "They tried to break me." Danielle's voice trembled, but not with weakness, with fire. "They tried to strip me of dignity, to humiliate me until I disappeared." She paused, eyes steady, words heavy with truth. "But instead of breaking, I rose. Every insult, every act of discrimination, it became fuel. What was meant to crush me only built my strength." Her chest lifted with resolve. "And now I stand not just for myself, but for every person who's ever been told they don't belong." The weight of her past hung in the silence, demanding reflection. Danielle's gaze pierced through, direct and unflinching. "Tell me, what would you have done?" Her question wasn't gentle, it was a challenge. Would you have walked away quietly, letting them win? Or would you have stood up, even when your knees shook, even when the world stared? She leaned forward, her tone daring the audience to confront themselves. "Because silence is surrender, and I refuse to surrender." The words landed sharp, forcing every listener to consider their own answer. "So I'll ask again, what would you have done?" Her lips curved, not in triumph, but in something deeper, vindication. "Justice isn't about revenge," Danielle said softly. "It's about reclaiming what was stolen, your voice, your pride, your place in this world." She took a breath, steady and strong. "I reclaimed mine. And I know some of you watching have your own story. Moments when the world tried to silence you. Don't keep them hidden. Share them. Speak them. Because together, our voices are impossible to ignore." Her final words lingered like a vow. "They tried to erase me. But here I am, justice served."